Hello and welcome to Coproduce Care. Today we have with us Kat Duncan-Rees. Kat is a co-production guru. She's worked on advising organisations about co-production across the country. So welcome, Kat.
Hello.
Hello. Now there's so much stuff you're doing around co-production. I don't even know where to start. But a good place to start might be how you got into doing this work.
I kind of stumbled into co-production, I think, a long time before we were even using the word. So my background is actually social policy.
Okay.
That's what I studied at university. At that time, I hadn't realised significance until fairly recently. I did quite a lot of work while I was doing my social policy degree with a disability rights group in Middlesbrough. I was at Teesside University.
Yeah, of course.
And I ended up writing my entire dissertation around access and accessibility and working with these people and working with one of the day services up there, which was at that time, which is a long time ago, quite progressive. And then from there, I ended up working in the voluntary sector. So I worked with a charity called Stockport Cerebral Palsy Society as a short breaks advisor, whatever that means.
Short breaks that are short.
But I very quickly learned, because I was probably late 20s by then, so it was my first proper job. And I've always had a natural kind of tendency to not necessarily do things the way that I'm told to do them.
This is perfect.
Or to do the things that people expect you to do in those particular jobs.
Yeah.
But I never really thought about it. That's just who I am, and that's just how I do things. So I'd often find myself being challenged on things and then having to replay and think, why did that happen? Why did I end up in that situation? Why did I have that conversation about that piece of work? Why did I nearly get sacked again then?
Just challenging people, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because I studied at university and I didn't know before I became a mature student anything about the disabled people's movement, about people-led organisations, and then I was learning all about all of this, and that's where I kind of got my, not frustration, but I started thinking about, well, this is all very amazing history, but I don't really see any of it represented in how we do care at the moment. So did you have that kind of thing where you're going from learning about it and then going into practice and finding a massive disconnect?
Yes, I think so. I mean, obviously studying something at university is very different to what you experience in real life, and I've never qualified to do social work or anything specifically like that. I thought about it for a nanosecond and then decided that wasn't really what I wanted to do. But from working in a few years in the voluntary sector, I kind of then stumbled into the job that I did at Stockport Council, where I ended up doing policy work, writing commissioning strategies, and all that kind of stuff. But again, very early on, I had to, it wasn't particularly an area of expertise, so I had to do things in a way that made sense to me. And I think part of that was, actually, if I'm going to write a business plan or a commissioning strategy, or, I'm not going to just sit in a darkened room and write it. I want to get out there and know what people really think or what it is they really want from this. And I had the privilege very early in my days in Stockport of working with a guy who used quite a lot of pinpoint facilitation stuff and the kit, and creating a space where you would get people into a room, predominantly around learning disabilities at that time, because it was kind of coincided, I think, with was it putting people first and all that kind of stuff. And I was just in awe of what this guy did and how he worked. And we were actually then asked to write, myself and another colleague, a commissioning strategy for day services for adults of a working age. Oh God, the language that we use sometimes. But we were asked to write it in response to some complaints that we'd had from carers whose adult children, they were concerned about whether they were going to be safe or not, because they kind of got it into their heads that all the day centres were going to be shut and their adult children were going to be thrown out onto the streets and there'd be nowhere safe for them to be. And so I said, well, that's fine. Well, I'm happy to pick up the work. I'm happy to, write this commissioning strategy. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and have conversations with all the different cohorts of people, if you like, entirely making it up as I go along. No idea what I'm doing, but it just kind of made sense to go and speak with the commissioners, speak with the service providers, speak with the people who, access those day centres themselves away from their parents or carers, to speak with the carers themselves. And I think what was really interesting about that as a process was it's kind of counterintuitive to co-production to work like that, but what we needed to do was establish a baseline. And so we learned very quickly through doing that actually all those different groups of people really wanted the same thing. But at that stage, had we put them in a room together, they would have tried to convince each other that they didn't want the same thing.
Right.
So in particular, the carers that had complained at that time, and out of genuine concern for their loved ones, it wasn't that it's a very difficult place to be for people. I recognise that when you are caring for somebody, you want to know in your heart that they're safe and they're in a place that you're confident for them to be in. And when that's kind of taken away from you, that causes all sorts of anxiety. But actually what we did was create a space where we had 16 other carers in the room with those 3 or 4 people who were concerned, and had a very open conversation, facilitated conversation about what was working for them in terms of the daytime support that their adult children were getting, what wasn't working, and the kinds of ideas that they had for the future in terms of how they wanted things to happen. And within the space of 2 hours, it was evident that these 4 carers who'd kind of got together to complain had said everything that they needed to say. But when we got to the point in the process where we get people to vote on what the priorities are moving forward, their views weren't top of the list, and that there were other people in the room that didn't feel as strongly as they did about what the future should look like. And it was a turning point, not just in terms of the journey that we then went on to further develop the commissioning strategy, but in terms of some of the thinking around how we have these conversations. And actually, sometimes we either avoid the conflict situations, or we just label people as troublemakers or difficult, without actually stopping to understand what the bigger picture is.
I want to go back to you talking about like power. I feel like in what you were saying, because you had a lot of people in the room. You were then listening to people who were receiving the services, which totally makes sense. And then when it came to making decisions, their views were top of the list. It sounds crazy that you've gone through all of that process. And then you haven't actually followed what you've asked them to do. You said that you might be able to do or whatever. You haven't followed their views.
So I wouldn't say strongly. So for this particular cohort of people, there was one option, and it was day centres. And actually what we were proposing was, I suppose you've got commissioners on one extreme at that point in time, which was, let's close all the day centres because everybody should be out in the community. And then the other extreme was, you've got parent carers who are like, sends the fear of God into people. It's like, what do you mean close all the day centres? What does that mean for me in terms of the responsibility that then I have to, care for my son or daughter? But also, what does it mean for them in terms of their safety? And actually, then you've got the people and the service providers in the middle of all that. And when we spoke to those adults who were in the day services, as they were at the time, about what they wanted to do, they were like, but I don't want to be here all the time, so that even, within that kind of, the play out of power is really, really interesting when you're talking about co-production, because it's not necessarily that, we want to give all the power to one group of people, or we want to share it. And we want to hear, what's important to everybody within that. So where we got to in terms of the day services work was, a situation where we understood that there was a need for some kind of hub approach, and that we needed to explore ways that people could go off and do different things, but there was still that reassurance of somewhere for people to come back to if they needed to. And I'm not saying that, all those years ago when we got to the end of that process, actually took us 18 months to write the strategy, because we kept going back to people and checking in. But I think what was really interesting learning before the word co-production even came into the local authority vocabulary was this whole idea that when you start those conversations with people, you don't have to finish the written strategy or document, dot all the I's, cross all the T's, whatever, before people can start to actually change or develop things. So we were working with, in particular, service providers who got it instantly, and from day one of having those conversations about what was working, what wasn't working, and how do we move things forward, started to look at the way that they were doing things, and to do that with the people who we were engaging with in terms of the process overall.
Yeah.
So by the end of 18 months, there had been, not only had we got a commissioning strategy, which probably nearly 10 years on actually, is still referred to as a long-term vision for what they wanted to achieve. You actually had a significant shift in terms of what was happening on the ground.
Yeah.
So my understanding, the way that kind of translated into my understanding of co-production over the years is actually we spend an awful lot of time and energy on, program managers, lots of money, writing business cases, commissioning strategies, highlight reports, all those other things, and trying to get everything perfect on paper and in policy, and then wonder why it doesn't actually have the traction or work in the way that we want it to.
Because we haven't gone back to people to say, is this actually what you want? Yeah. If I'm watching this now, I'm commissioner, and I'm thinking, okay, well that sounds really nice, Kat, but how do I do this now in my job? In reality, I've got financial issues, I've got things that we contractually can't do, time restraints. It all sounds lovely, but in reality, I can't do it, I'm restricted. Like, do you get those instances where people say, nah, I can't do that because it's too expensive?
All the time, I mean, and it's actually not just the money side of it, it's just the whole kind of amount of effort and energy that people perceive that it takes. But actually, if you think about it, if you think about co-production in terms of relationships and connections, rather than a set of tasks that you have to follow in order to get a particular result, we've had years of consultation and engagement, and ask these questions and this questionnaire and this focus group and that focus group, and if you follow these set of tasks, then you'll get the answers that you want, or not, and you'll do what you want anyway at the end of it. So why bother? Co-production for me, and particularly the work that we've been doing with the National Co-Production Advisory Group over the last couple of years, is very relational, and I often relate it back to just life. From the minute I get out of bed in the morning, and negotiate with my darling little children over breakfast, and all sorts of other things. They're all the skills and all the things that I would expect people to bring into a relationship around co-production. The problem is people turn up to work and they leave an element of themselves at the door, and the person that they become when they enter into the work environment, and I generalise wildly, is almost not human. And so we have reduced people who work in health and social care to almost like robots that follow a set of rules and procedures and systems, and they're waiting for the magic answer or the magic formula that is co-production, or maybe a co-production fairy.
Yes.
Kind of
co-production fairy.
Sprinkle some co-production magic and dust, and one day they'll wake up and everything will be beautifully personalised and co-produced. And the effort and the energy that is going into writing those policies and procedures and business cases, I might have mentioned this already once before, is huge. And the amount of money, when actually if people had permission to invest that same amount of energy and resource into just building relationships and connections with each other within the workplace, with other departments within the workplace, with those service providers that they're working with, and, you know, just as importantly, the people who are accessing those services, and then take it a step further to the wider kind of community and, you know, the places where people actually live their lives day to day. Then I think what we would begin to see is something very, very different.
Hugely different.
So,
yeah.
you know, co-production is at its very essence that whole thing around human to human connection. And, you know, there has been, I've noticed on social media over the last few weeks, there's been, you know, more stuff coming out about being more human, or, you know, be human, and actually the work that we've been doing in with Co-Production Advisory Group has been, you know, experimenting with that probably for, you know, 3 years. And I would say a lot of the way that I've worked, and the you know, the privilege that I've had to work with so many amazing people who've allowed me to kind of just experiment and do things. You know, the amount of trust I think people have put in me over the years is quite it's hard to think about, I think, because I wouldn't be able to be here now having this conversation if it wasn't for the fact that people had just said, you know what, we don't honestly really know where she's going with this, but we just know from experience that it will go somewhere,
and that something needs to change.
Yeah,
I love the idea of what you just said about building those relationships and how it starts with the immediate people that you're working with, and then working it out to the community, and thinking of it less like, you know, I suppose when you're making widgets or something, is usually my usual example. It's very easy to say, if we've taken it from classic MBA, business degree, you say you need a business plan, you need marketing plan, you need all of these processes and procedures, and then once you follow this, then everything will work right. You know, the classic forward way of production, and fitting that into the care sector doesn't work. It doesn't work because, like you said, because you're dealing with people and all of their connections. So hearing you say that, and hearing that what you're saying is for anybody who wants to connect with you, going to those commissioners and trying to help people unpick some of the issues that they have. And I think it's just brilliant conversations to have, really.
Yeah.
Because some people, I think, are just stuck into these systems. They think, well, how do we think outside it? Surely we can't have a relationship with providers because we have to keep a distance, or, you know, it's how you develop those relationships, I suppose.
Yeah, and actually that's a really interesting point, because, you know, we say that we have to keep our distance, and we talk a lot about conflicts of interest and, you know, all those kind of things, but actually keeping the distance is what is causing a lot of the problems in the system, because actually, unless you can have those honest human-to-human conversations about what you're trying to change, you're leaving people in a space where they're making a lot of assumptions, or they're blindly following processes and procedures, or, and some of the work that I've been involved with in Dudley around kind of domiciliary care and, you know, the kind of wider conversations that we're having there, you have that rift between commissioner and provider, where the providers can see that the way that they're having to do things is not helping people live the life that they want to live, because the process here isn't flexible, and they're, you know, so there's a lot of assumptions then made in the middle about actually what bits of that can be changed, or what do the providers have the power to do differently. You know, what are the rules that we follow on a day-to-day basis in terms of supporting people that don't make sense. You know, why when I get a support plan from the local authority about an individual, can I then not you know, change the way that I work with that individual, because actually what they're telling me that what they want is actually different to what the person at the assessment end has determined for that person.
That's a really good point, actually. It's not just about assessment, about change, the way you're able to change support that you provide to somebody. Because I know where I've seen instances where someone has come to us and said, we want to change our support, or we need more support. and the levels of bureaucracy you have to go through to change that support for someone, and it takes time, and then they need more support, and then you want to make sure that you're going to be able to pay the staff to deliver that support, and that is prolonged. So the person that suffers at the other end is the person who needs the support.
Yeah.
It's like a catch-22 situation, but could be changed if there was better dialogue.
Yeah, better relationships.
Better relationships.
And connection. I know.
I've just solved it.
It's,
We're done.
it's that simple.
Yeah.
And, you know, people will often say, oh, yeah, but it's too difficult, it takes too much time, it's too expensive.
Yeah.
Actually, do you know what? It's no more difficult than getting a box of decent biscuits and having a conversation about what really matters, and actually understanding, you know, what's stopping people being able to live the life that they want to live, and working back and unpicking some of that.
How important do you think is leadership in all of this?
Hugely important.
Yeah.
But I think not necessarily in the way that we would understand, you know, leadership. I think it's, so I see some really good examples, you know, when I'm on the road, doing what I do independently, and I'm thinking particularly in terms of the work we're doing in Shropshire, is actually you cannot teach people to be good leaders. You can work with people who are in that space, I guess, or who have got themselves in that space. So, you know, I think of some of the conversations and some of the events that we've done in Shropshire, and, you know, the way that the directors of social care there have really taken the time to think about how the way that they lead is having a knock-on effect and having an impact on the people that they're ultimately trying to support, and recognising that they do things and that they make decisions about things because it's their job.
Right.
But then realising that actually some of those decisions that they are making, because of the relationships that they've then built up with the people on the, you know, who receive direct payments and what have you, have come back and said, what the hell did you just do that for? You know, why didn't you come and ask us what we thought about that? And having the ability just to put themselves in that vulnerable space and say, do you know what? I don't know. It's a really stupid thing to do, and you're right. Let's stop and think about what we could have done differently and how we move things forward. And so for me, I think particularly in terms of co-production, it is how do we give leaders permission to admit when they've cocked things up, or to reflect honestly on some of the things that they've done, and really think about how they could have done things differently.
Okay, so if you can't teach the good leadership that you need to have, and if you have leaders already who just don't get it, are you saying that we just need to teach them to reflect, or do those leaders need to be in a different job?
Some probably need to be in a different job, or not there at all. But actually, I think everybody has that opportunity, you know. And my mind is blown time and time again when I'm in a room of, you know, 20, 30, 40, maybe 100 people, and we've gone through a process of asking questions, you know, just really simple things like, what was it that motivated you to get out of bed this morning? And getting people to kind of capture those things on cards and visualise it, and then, you know, reflect back with people and say, actually, do you know what, our lives are just normal everyday, you know, things that motivate us are normal everyday things. And I think we lose sight of some of that as we come into the kind of workplace, if you like, and it all becomes, you know, we forget that actually what really motivates us is our family, you know, taking the dog out for a walk in the morning, getting off that early morning run.
Which may or may not happen.
Whatever it is, you know, you're into that cup of tea that you have first thing in the morning, or whatever. That actually, you know, that's life, and that's living life. And we've gone down that route of, okay, well, that's life, and this is the service that we work in. And then we've tried to fit people's lives into that kind of service area. So it's simple things like that. And then also we've done a lot of creating space for people to really begin to feel for themselves what it's like. So I might say to you, think of a time when you've had a really positive experience of receiving information, support or advice about something really important to you. I don't want to know about the situation. I want you to hold it in your mind, and I want you to notice how it makes you feel. And then I want you to write down what those feelings are. And then I want you to think about what it is that contributes to those feelings, or what happened in that situation that contributed to you feeling that way. So we're not even going to touch on what it was that actually happened. We're going to think about how it made you feel and what contributed to you feeling that way. You do that again with a negative situation, or a time when you've had a really bad experience of receiving information, support, advice. You don't talk about that situation. I can see it in your face already, the shift in mood almost. We just ask people to hold it in their mind and notice how it makes them feel, and then to write down those feelings, and then think about what it was that contributed to feeling that way, and then a little bit of time to reflect on how it felt to do that as an activity, and what that says about the people that they're interacting with, or not about the people, but what that says about the relationships and the interactions that they have with people in their service on a day-to-day basis. And the shift is, often very significant.
And is that with service providers?
With commissioners,
and with commissioners,
directors, frontline workforce, service providers, absolutely everybody who's involved in, wanting to look at how we work better to enable people to live the life they want.
I think that's really insightful, simply because I'm thinking of some safeguarding that I've been working with at the moment. And just allowing maybe a team of people who might be caught up in a bad situation to reflect on not just what we're doing, but how what we are doing affects the other person. That's just, and it works for the person the care worker, then it works for the staff who are managing those other staff, so managers, because thinking about, how are my demands for my staff team affecting my staff team, and then how is that ripple effect affecting how that they provide care, and then going back and working back to commissioners and saying, well, how is the commissioning behaviours affecting how providers operate and what demands they give to their managers, and those then trickle all the way down. So again, it's about that relationship, but starting from, well, how are my behaviours affecting the people I'm working with?
Absolutely. And how and then what does it feel like? And at that point you can begin to say to people, actually, if you're working in a way that is co-produced, then actually what you're doing is you're realising much more of those positive feelings, because you're exhibiting much more of those behaviours that contribute to those positive feelings. And often people, when they've had a bad experience, they come into a room or a situation, and like being here, just the cameras in the room could trigger a whole load of anxiety for somebody, and it's nothing to do with you or anybody else in the room. It's the environment or the situation that is causing the anxiety, but that might then have a knock-on effect in what the way that you view me and the conversation that we're having, and then it just escalates. But you've already made those assumptions about somebody based on something else that has caused them to react in a particular way, and it just escalates. I had one social worker reflect back in a workshop at the end of that particular activity. I'd never thought to ask somebody how they were feeling. We always focus on dealing with the tangible situation, and actually, if we stop and take a step back and think, how are you feeling right now, and what can we do to change that, then what we might do is something very different to actually addressing the issue that we're faced with. You mentioned safeguarding. So one story I heard recently from It's actually a theatre company in North Manchester, and I'm going to see it next week. Is it next week or the week after? Rats in the Sofa is their
Sounds
production.
good.
Yeah. So they've worked with people who have been on the receiving end of safeguarding, issues, incidents. And one story that stuck in my mind was an older lady whose next door neighbour came in to see her every day. But when she came in to see her, she took money from her. And clearly, huge safeguarding issues there. But because of this piece of work and because of the conversations that they had with people to understand what really, really mattered to this woman, they were able to understand that just severing that relationship wasn't going to be helpful.
Right.
Because the reflections of the lady were that if her neighbour didn't come in, she wouldn't see anybody. She knew that she was coming in and taking her money, but actually that was a small price to pay to have actual contact with another human being on a daily basis. So the conversation then went from, well, we need to call the police and get this woman arrested, to actually, yes, we do need to deal with that side of it, but equally we need to, address the need the loneliness in this woman that's fulfilling. So just to deal with the safeguarding issue would have actually left this woman in a worse position.
How did they know that? Was that from discussing?
Through having conversations. And so this is a local authority in the north of the country who've actually done some, it's a safeguarding board that have commissioned this piece of work.
Right.
And actually they're learning through this piece of work that they're then reflecting back to people through using the kind of theatre, interactive theatre. So another one was a chap who likes to give money when he's out and about to people who are homeless or obviously in need. And of course the immediate thing is, well, he's been exploited by those people. They're making him give him their money, and that's not good. We need to stop him from doing it. And when they sat down and explored that with him as part of the conversations that we were having about the actual production, he was able to reflect back to them and say, actually, do you know what? When I give people money, it makes me feel good. So don't stop me from doing it, please, because that's something that's really important to me. But maybe let's have a conversation about how often I do it, or how much money I give people, and that kind of thing. We just jump in with our own assumptions about.
Yeah, and I think that's a great example of how co-production can actually go through every bit of care. It's not just, because when I think about co-production, sometimes I think co-production even, I think, oh, well, it's maybe the care plan, or maybe it's, I don't know, how relationships with commissioners or within organisation, but actually there's so many different, it's just our relationships and how we make decisions with or for people. It's quite, it can permeate through everything. The word co-production isn't helpful, or is it?
I don't know, actually. I go through phases where I think it's not helpful, and I go through phases where I think it is. And I kind of I've sort of got to a point where I think if people understand that co-production is ultimately, around the value and the social value, and the value that we put on, those caring relationships, or those relationships that are necessary for people to be able to live the life they want to live, then actually it can be a useful word. But I think it's become one of those words that people just band about, and they don't, they don't stop and think about what it actually really means. So for me, co-production is actually only the tip of the iceberg.
Oh, you talk about that iceberg. I read a blog about your iceberg. Not about it, but I did a feature. Can you talk about your iceberg? Would you need the picture?
No, it's fine.
Yes, let's talk icebergs. So this is a slide that I've seen presented, actually not by you, but it's totally your side. And it was referenced to you, so it's fine. And you had, I think it was co-production at the top and co-creation was at the bottom. So you had the C, and then you had the tip of the iceberg was co-production. So how did you make that slide? How did you come up with that?
So some of the work that I've been involved with over the years, with look at exploring things like, I don't know if you come across the rapid testing work, the 100-day challenge stuff that lots of different areas are doing. It actually came from an organisation in the States, but Nesta have been backing it, and the NHS have had quite a strong interest in this. And so I trained as a coach, and I supported some of the kind of teams that work through the 100-day challenge process, which is really interesting in itself, actually, in terms of the relational element of what we're talking about. But at the end of this particular round of rapid testing, we were asked to draw an iceberg on a piece of flip chart paper, and put a line across and talk about the tangible things that we had achieved. So the tip of the iceberg, if you like. What was it tangible that had made the difference or improved the experience for people, if you like? In this case, it was elective care in terms of NHS world. And then we were asked to focus on what sits under the surface of the water. What was it that happened within your team? And you're talking teams of diverse people, so clinicians, consultants, GPs, practice managers, patients, nurses, voluntary sector, a whole range of people who form these teams. What was it that happened under the surface of the water that enabled you to achieve those tangible things? And I thought, yes, great, at last, somebody's got it. They're understanding that what needs to happen here is that we need to focus on the conditions for change. And they then went on to say, because we want to scale the tip of the iceberg. I was just like, okay, you've just completely, done this potentially really great activity with us, and then totally undermined your own kind of thinking, if you like. Because if you take the tip of the iceberg away from what's happened under the surface of the water, then it will just drift off, or you're going to take it somewhere where the conditions are not right. So it got me thinking, okay, if I was going to kind of use that as an analogy or a way of describing co-production, what would that look like? And actually for me, I started with that bit under the surface of the water, if you like, being co-production, and the tip of the iceberg being those tangible things that happen. But over the last sort of year or so, and through some of the work that I've done with an organisation called People's Voice Media, and the conversation that I've had with Hayley, which were really instrumental in shaping this, realised that actually what we need to do is focus on how we co-create the right conditions in order that co-production happens.
Got it.
So the tip of the iceberg becomes co-production, and you can't do co-production unless the conditions are right, unless the relationships are there, unless we have those human-to-human interactions, that we challenge each other, that we're willing to fail, make mistakes, test different ways of working, have fun even. It's like, see the person, it just shifts the whole kind of conversation and dynamic about what co-production is, and it just seemed to resonate and make sense. So as I've kind of talked about the iceberg in lots of different settings over the last few years, it's kind of iterated for me. Who knows what will happen next?
I think it should be on the desk of every manager working in social care, because sometimes you talk about co-production and people sometimes just use co-production and they don't really know what it is. And the whole idea of what makes it is the co-creation, and sometimes that's kind of pushed aside, or sometimes people say, I'm just going to do I'm going to consult. So many C words, but I'm going to consult, and then that will be the co-creation bit. But actually, what does it mean? Now you've said that, I'm going to go back to the iceberg and I'm going to look at it having through that lens that you've described, because I think it's amazing.
I've done, what does the tip of the iceberg look like when we focus on the conditions that we've got now in a lot of places, in terms of tick box and policy, evidence, all this kind of thing. I've not explained that at all well, but just if all you're doing is keeping people safe, following the policies and the procedures and all those kind of things. What does the tip of the iceberg? And that's production, not co-production. So It's kind of
right. So you're looking at the landscape as is, and then how do you need to change that to add the co-bit? How am I going to do this with other people rather than just see it as it is in a process that we follow and we tick boxes?
So what we do now is production. What we want to do is co-production. And actually, if you go back to Edgar Kahn's kind of writings on this, you know, the grandfather, can I say that? Is he that old? I don't know. Probably not to me. The you know, one of the founders of co-production, as we know it now, not the original founder, he talks about you know, the economy of social care in those terms, in the sense that what we've done over the years is we've created an economy for care that can only be valued if it's produced or paid for.
Okay.
And actually, co-production is about how do we then begin to broaden that out and value what is natural, what is in those relationships, you know, what people and communities already do with themselves. So, and then you come back to safeguarding. So actually, a lot of the things that, you know, we then apply safeguarding to, and I am not, you know, diminishing by any stretch of the imagination the importance of safeguarding in you know, in a lot of situations, but actually we often end up using it as an excuse because that care isn't paid for by the local authority or by whoever, then it obviously isn't as good or of the same value as the natural care and support that people have around them. So
I think we could unpick that for days because
moving swiftly on.
Because you're talking about what kind of work is valued and the work that is valued done by women and
absolutely
done by women and how we see it in society and maybe another talk.
I don't know if is he even still alive. I don't know. Don't edit that out, please.
No, I've never heard of him.
Edgar Kahn.
No.
So No More Throwaway People is his book. So have you seen the Blobs and Squares video narrated by the wonderful Brian Blessed? I could just listen to it because
that's the one that Tina Coleman presented when I did the co-production workshop, which is how I even knew that the word existed 2 years ago.
Blobs and Squares was an attempt to, a very, very good attempt, I will say, to create something visual or film out of Edgar Kahn's work. Hence the title No More Throwaway People.
Okay.
Because that's his whole thing is actually, you know, we treat people almost as disposable commodities.
Like widgets if we were making...
And actually it's so much more than that. So, fascinating book, if you can get hold of a copy.
Well, we're going to try and get links to it somehow and put it in the description box and video and the thing if you can. So I think before we close off, I'd like to hear a little bit more about the work that you're doing with organisations and the National Co-Production Advisory. I won't get it wrong.
It's a mouthful.
But I think it'd be nice to hear about what you're doing and also the kind of projects that they're doing because they're working with the sector. So think the combined experience of the National Co-Production Advisory Group, you know, people like the amazing Clinton Farquharson, Sally Percival, Isaac Samuels, and, you know, a whole host of other people whose experience of health and social care is deeply personal. They're either carers or they have physical disability, autism, the whole kind of, you know, it crosses quite a lot of the different things around equalities and stuff as well. There is no, you know, bit of work, there's no stone left, you know, unturned in terms of that kind of way of working. So we have, you know, and they're colleagues, they're not people with lived experience who just come in and, you know, tell us their story and then disappear off again. You know, they're people who have over the years learned a lot about some of the stuff that we've been talking about, what co-production actually really means, and the whole relational element of it, and they can talk about it. So you know, you saw Sally using the iceberg analogy. That's the first time she's spoken to that particular slide herself in public life. But that's brilliant because actually that just shows the kind of you know, way that we're trying to work in terms of sharing those experiences and skills.
And I would say even more recently, the challenge is, how do we get into that space personally where, we're expecting the advisory group members to make themselves very vulnerable and talk about their own personal experiences in a way that we don't often in those kind of forums and, public arenas. We expect a lot of people, and then we don't give back. So that's part of the learning, is how do we rumble some of this out together, and actually create a much stronger relationship between those two elements, and continue to, model even more potential for how working in this way makes a difference. I've done some work with providers in Dudley, and Kate Sibthorpe from the advisory group and Clinton have supported with that. The scope for people to get hold of the materials and use them, and just come back to us for tips and ideas and advice, or just check in. And
I wanted to move on to talking about being more pirate, because I've seen something on YouTube where you talked about this concept of being more pirate, and it's pretty much everything you're talking about: the robs, the use of the social care, just thinking about things differently, do things differently, challenging. Is that, have I got it in a very brief nutshell?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of years ago, this book crossed my path. It's bright pink. It's called Be More Pirate, and it's one of those things that you engage with. And I read this book, and I just thought, everything I've done now in my whole life in terms of my work makes sense in a not in a different way. I think it kind of legitimised, if you like, or helped me to accept that the way that I worked was helpful and okay. Although not everybody perceives it like, not everybody always perceives it like that. But in essence, Be More Pirate draws its inspiration from specific time in pirate history. So we're talking Golden Age pirates. These were people who were, completely naffed off with the establishment and the established way of doing things. So, the Navy, where a lot of these people worked beforehand, was a shocking place to be, and the amount of exploitation and discrimination, and the way that people were treated by the establishment was quite shocking. So a lot of these naval officers decided that they'd had enough, and they were going to go pirate, if you like, and they were going to create a different way of doing things. They were going to rewrite, if you like, the social code, or do the things that made sense to them in order to challenge the establishment. In fact, I was just having a conversation with somebody earlier today to say, because Bristol's got pirate heritage. Learned that today. And he was saying, but also there's a lot around, slavery and everything. And I said, but those Golden Age pirates were some of the people in the very early days of moving forward with slavery that were going and freeing some of those slaves. So what you would find is pirates like Black Caesar, who was a black man who had been a slave and had become then freed by pirates, went on to become a pirate captain himself. And it was the only place at that time in history where it didn't matter what colour your skin was, whether you were male, female, your age. If you had the capacity and the skills, and you were understood what it meant to create the right conditions to bring about change, then you would be voted in to be pirate captain. Pirate crews operated on the basis that they had a pirate captain and a quartermaster. They were equal in status. They were voted in by the crew, so they didn't assume position of power, and everybody on board a pirate ship had a vote, one man or woman, one vote. Again, 200 years before women got the right to vote, in terms of how we know it today.
So it's literally about how people are coming out and creating change by going against the grain. Although I would say piracy is maybe a bit extreme, but a lot of, I'm sure you've been told, a lot of what you are trying to advocate for is just a little bit out there.
Yeah.
So it's just being confident to say, actually, we need to create change here. It's going to look very different.
So yeah, you're absolutely right, and even just one of the conversations we're having today around that about but surely that there are bad pirates. Well, yeah, actually there were a lot of bad pirates, if you want to phrase it like that.
Yeah.
But actually, it's about who's in control. And you could talk about the level of exploitation that the Navy created in back in that golden age time, and you could say, well, they're the wrong pirates to be in control, and actually what these were people who were disillusioned, some were as young as 17, some were retired Navy officers. You've got your women, Anne Bonny, for example, who were also pirate captains, but the whole kind of be more pirate thing is not go out there and be pirate. It's thinking about actually what can we challenge within the system, the way that we're doing things. What is it that we're doing that just doesn't make sense? What are the rules that we follow? Real or perceived rules, and a lot of the rules we follow are often not even real rules. They're just the way that we've always done things. And how do we break those rules and as Rob did, say, actually, we're not going to do that anymore. We can do it like this instead. So, it makes a lot of sense.
Okay, so I want to talk a tiny little bit, we've only got a few minutes left, about politics. So we both attended the APPG on adult social care. I have to remember to put the adult in because there was another one on social care, which is slightly different. And it was a group talking about, with politicians and people giving on a panel, talking about co-production, co-creation, what it means for them. So there were some carers there as well. And we wrote a blog about it, or Co-Produce Care wrote a blog about it. So it's out there if you want to have a look. But what was interesting for me was some of the questions that came from the floor, and people who with lived experience were just talking about just a basic comment of, we've been saying we need to include people, that we need to help people, they need to have more voice. And one person said he'd been hearing about it for 40 years, and he seemed really, really frustrated. And I kind of felt his pain, because then a few other people said the same thing. I mean, why do you think it's so hard for it to go from a conversation to being a reality across the board? Is it just we have to expect that you're going to be doing the work that you're doing with different local authorities, and people like you and the organisations you're working with are just going to be spreading the message, and that takes time? Or is it something that needs to come from, that bit needs to come from top down, from politics, to say, we are just going to do this in a different way. We're going to deliver social care. We're going to talk about social care in an entirely different way and put the past ways of working behind us.
It's a really interesting question, and I felt it as well, and I think that has been a deep frustration of mine, and NCAD colleagues, TLAP colleagues, and are we just perpetuating the same conversation over and over again? And actually, I think to a certain extent we are. But I think what needs to change is not the conversation, but actually it's again comes back to looking at those conditions. So we are still expecting the answer to those conversations to be in the policies and the procedures and the tick boxes and how we monitor and measure and all those other things. And that's where we're comfortable. So that's where we always go back to. Okay, let's write another business case about it. Let's write another policy about it. Let's write a policy about personalisation. How many policies about personalisation do we need before we can actually just get on and do it? And I think the response is, there's some excellent work going on in Hammersmith and Fulham, for example. Not time to go into it now, but they're people that you might want to talk to. But I think the response to it is more actually, what would happen if we, gave people like the members of the advisory group more freedom to work within the system to actually influence the changes that need to happen, But in order to do that, how can we take the money out of the program management approaches that we do? You know, I saw somebody on social media getting really excited about Prince 2 training, and I'm just thinking, I've never done that. I've avoided it like the plague for years. You know, it just never appealed to me. I never really saw the sense in it. But we are still in that kind of mode of, you know, talking about it, saying, yeah, brilliant, that's great, we need to change things, and then going back into trying to change things through the same lens. And almost it's the filter and the lens that we're doing things through that needs to shift. And yes, I think there is an element of which that has to come from the top, but not that people have to do anything at the top. In a sense, they need to get out of the way and allow people to work it out for themselves in the way that we've been supporting, you know, local authorities like Dudley and Shropshire and Essex and, you know, other places to do. Just get out of the way. It's out, yes. And get out of the way. Let people live life.
That is a great point to end it on, I think.
Brilliant.
I normally ask a question about politics in a totally different way, but that's great. Thank you so much, Kat. All the stuff that Kat's been talking about is going to be on the description box of the video that you're watching, if you're watching it. Otherwise, go on our website and you'll find everything that you need in terms of all the links, the books and websites she's been talking about. So thank you so much for coming and talking with us on Co-Produce Care.